Hello dear friends, Patrick here. I'll be posting this video on Saturday, July the 8th, 2023. How are you doing today? I hope you're doing great. Wanted to continue sharing with you this most delightful book that I've got called Disturbing the Universe by Freeman Dyson, and it is such a pleasure to get my hands on such a wonderful book after going through trash after trash after trash after trash after trash. So today I just want to share with you a few brief comments that came up from chapter 5 that jumped out at me that I think are very important to expand upon, and also I'm going to include some snippets in the description below so that you can see what I'm talking about. He's finished his service in the war, and now we're looking at a time frame of 1947, September, when he enrolls as a graduate student in physics at Cornell University. And so I believe that's in Ithaca, New York. So he's a student, and we're in 1947. They've just finished World War II with the atomic bomb, and he is working with physicists that have worked on the atomic bomb, in particular Oppenheimer and Einstein himself. And so I'm going to share with you a little bit. And I like the way that he drops these subtle, tiny hints as he's speaking. He's talking about, for example, one of his professors, and he says, referring to Einstein, Bohr, Heisenberg, Dirac, these famous physicists, and he's speaking to this one person in particular. He's saying, he stood like Moses on the mountain showing us the promised land. It was for us students to move in and make ourselves at home there. So he was welcomed into this group. Hans Bethe was another famous theoretical physicist that he worked with, and he was part of this group that all were working on the discovery and the application of splitting the atom. And so he talks here, something that was interesting I wanted to share with you. He said that this experiment, he's talking about when he did measurements of light, and the different spectrum of light caused different electrical voltages to be produced. He says, this experiment brought home to me, as nothing else could, the truth of Einstein's remark. One may say the eternal mystery of the world is its comprehensibility. And he's talking about the experiments that he did in mathematics. He says, here I was sitting at my desk for weeks on end doing the most elaborate and sophisticated calculations to figure out how an electron should behave. And here was the electron on my little oil drop. He had this experiment set up with little microscopic amounts of oil and measuring how the electrons would move, knowing quite well how to behave without waiting for the result of my calculation. How could one seriously believe that the electron really cared about my calculation one way or the other, and yet the experiments at Columbia showed that it did care? Somehow or other, all these complicated mathematics that I was scribbling established rules that the electron on the oil drop was bound to follow. We know that this is so. Why it is so, why the electron pays attention to our mathematics, is a mystery that even Einstein could not fathom. And this was the whole birth of what we call today quantum physics, where things behave at the quantum level that are interconnected with and dependent upon the characteristic of the observer doing the experiment. There's an interrelationship between mind and physical reality. And so he goes on to talk about his work with Robert Oppenheimer, and really, really fascinating stuff, and extremely well written as well. And so eventually, the thing with the development of the atomic bomb is that very soon afterwards, they expanded their research into the development of the hydrogen bomb. Now, the hydrogen bomb, in case you're not aware, is 1,000 times more powerful than the atomic bombs that they had dropped already in World War II. And as horrible as those things are, the hydrogen bomb is scaling up by a factor, of 1,000. And so at that point, they said, in the long run, the only hope of survival would lie in a complete surrender of all nuclear activities to a strong international authority. And see, here you see the birth of the push towards a United Nations and towards the one world government or globalism via science, because science had essentially conquered the world. Science was responsible for the development of the nuclear bomb, the atomic age. He goes on to say the nuclear arms race had begun, and the idea of international control could at best be a long-range dream. See? And so he goes on to say the age of innocence is now over for all of us. So, and Oppenheimer's famous quote, right, when he says he has become a destroyer of worlds and all that kind of stuff. So the science had split the atom, had created this incredible ability to not only to create power and energy, but also to create huge destructive power. And so because of that, this was essentially the birth of a strong push towards what we see continuing today with the efforts towards globalism, right? And so it continues on. It gets a little heavy at times, but most of it is very easy to read. He says here, the electron does whatever it likes. This, he's quoting one of his colleagues by the name of Dick Feynman, who is a famous physicist. He says, the electron goes all over space and time in all possible ways. It can even go backward in time whenever it chooses. If you start with an electron in this state at a certain time, you'll want to see whether it will be in some other state at another time. You just add the contributions. He goes on detailing the characteristics of how electrons behave, and it becomes very bizarre how the electrons are able to behave. And then near the end of the chapter, he says that Oppenheimer received a personal letter from this gentleman by the name of S. Tominaga from Tokyo University, who had been doing work that predated the work, the famous developments that were being done at Columbia by a number of years, but they were very similar, but they just didn't have the mathematical calculations behind them. And so they worked together. They were developed by Tominaga in 1943, and then he came over to Columbia in 1948, and together with Oppenheimer, they worked together on many problems. He wrote a paper called On a Relativistic Invariant Formulation of the Quantum Theory of Wave Fields. And so they cooperated together, and they came up with a lot of amazing discoveries. And it's interesting because he says here, he's describing Tominaga. He says, when I met Tominaga for the first time, a letter to my parents recorded my immediate impression of him. So he wrote a letter to his parents. The author, Freeman Dyson, is telling his parents about when he first met this gentleman from Japan who was a brilliant physicist. He says, he is more able than either Schwinger or Feynman, that's Dick Feynman, to talk about ideas other than his own, and he has enough of his own too. He is an exceptionally unselfish person. On his table among the physics journal was a copy of the New Testament. And he throws in that little tidbit to finish off chapter 5. And again, he's giving a nod to the reader in a number of different places without being overt about it, that the foundation for truth, the foundation for scientific truth is coming from the revelation of God, the inspiration of God. He is dropping these little hints for the reader to pick up on, and that's just another one. That's one of the more obvious ones, saying that here he met this brilliant physicist who contributed greatly to development of the quantum physics body of knowledge at the time. And he was also letting us know that that individual was inspired by the New Testament, right? The words of God, the truth of the gospel, the truth of Jesus Christ, our Savior, who has access to all truth and all knowledge about how this universe works. So really just a very inspiring book, very delightful, insightful, and very interesting to see how the global elites came up with the idea, if you want to call it that, of thinking that there is a necessity for global control. They're afraid that if a single nation state were to get access to the development of hydrogen bomb technology, they could accidentally ignite the atmosphere and burn up the entire Earth. And this is not an impossibility, because when they bombed Dresden, they bombed Berlin, and they weren't as successful, but there were specific towns that they bombed, and they ended up creating, they dropped these incendiary bombs, and this is what they were trying to do, was they would try and create a firestorm. And they created a firestorm in some cities, and sometimes it wouldn't work because they were too scattered out. But when they hit the right concentration of incendiary bombs that they were dropping from the Lancasters, they would create a firestorm, and the firestorm would just consume everything in its path. They wiped out 40,000 people in Dresden. The entire city was basically leveled without having to bomb the entire city. It's hard to imagine how that's possible, but apparently this is what they were able to accomplish with this incendiary type of bombs that they were using at the time. And so a hydrogen bomb, you got to just imagine 1,000 times more powerful than the atomic bombs that they dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. You could ignite the atmosphere. The entire Earth could be swallowed up in a nuclear holocaust, a firestorm that would destroy all life on Earth, because it's hard to imagine such a thing as being possible, but apparently such a thing is possible, but it is spoken of in hushed tones amongst the scientific community. They don't want the public to be aware even that such a thing is actually possible, especially at that time back in 1948 when they had originally came up with the hydrogen bomb technology. They said this is just too scary to even think about that such a thing could be done, and apparently it can be done. And so this fueled a push against any single nation having access to the technology in the first place, but also an ongoing push towards, oh, we have to somehow, control the entire world to prevent this from ever getting into the hands of a single national leader who may use it to go bonkers and destroy the entire Earth, habitable conditions of living for everybody. And so this is how they felt and thought, and a number of people still do think that. But in any event, God is still in control, and He protects us from these things. But these are the kind of things that these theoretical physicists spent their time working on, and it's pretty scary what they're capable of. And these are only the things that have been revealed on a very superficial level. We don't know all the capabilities of other things that they have in space and in particle accelerators and on, you name it. There's all kinds of scary stuff out there, but we leave that in God's hands. God's in control, and we pray for our leaders that, that we will be able to live a life of dignity and peace and happiness and joy. So this is an amazing book, and as other things come out, I will share them with you, and I hope you're doing well. I hope it's not too scary or too heavy for you to hear these type of things that have occurred and are continuing to occur, but this is the world we live in today. So God bless you. Thank you for watching, and we'll talk to you again real soon. We'll talk to you later. Take care of yourself. Bye-bye now.